Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the epic story of a forgotten European power, one that rose from the Balkan Mountains to go toe-to-toe with the Byzantine Empire itself.
Okay, so picture this. Deep in the heart of medieval Europe, there was this kingdom, a powerhouse that dominated the southeast for centuries. And yet today, most people have never even heard of it. And this wasn't just some small player. We're talking about a state forged in the fire of over 140 wars, a conflict that created a powerful and sophisticated civilization.
So that's the empire we're talking about today, from these incredible beginnings to a really tragic end. And to really get a grip on this story, we're going to need a bit of a roadmap. We're going to walk through its history in 6 parts, basically charting its rise and fall, from scattered tribes to a continental empire, and finally to a powerful memory that shaped a nation. All right, so where does this story even begin? Well, it starts in a really chaotic time, with new people arriving who would totally reshape what was left of the Roman Empire and plant the seeds of a future nation right in the rugged mountains of the Balkans. Now, this is where things get really interesting. We're talking about the very first steps toward becoming a real state. And let me tell you, it was a brutal fight for survival, caught between 2 massive powers that led to a strategic deal that would change the map of Europe forever.
So back in the 7th century, the Byzantine emperor, a guy named Heraclius, had a massive problem on his hands. The Avars, this nomadic confederation from the Eurasian steppes, were pouring into the Balkans. These guys were serious empire builders using advanced siege warfare. But Heraclius, in a pretty desperate move, made a deal with another group of migrants, the Slavs. Now, they were different. They were agricultural communities looking for land, not just conquest. The deal was simple. Fight the Avars for us, and you can settle here permanently. It was a deal meant to create a buffer zone for his empire.
And wow, did that decision have consequences? Over the next couple of centuries, these Slavic settlers started mixing with the local populations, and a whole new identity began to form. By the 8th century, a leader, Prince Vyacheslav, managed to unite a bunch of clans into the first Serbian principality. Then, his descendant, Vlastimir, proved they were for real by beating back a huge Bulgarian invasion, a massive victory that secured their independence. The state got bigger under Prince Chaslav, but when he died, the whole thing shattered. It actually took another 100 years for the state to be reborn, this time on the Adriatic coast, in a place called Dukla. All of this chaos was just setting the stage for a new dynasty to rise up. You know, for any state to really become a kingdom, a real power, it needs strong, visionary leadership. And that is exactly where the Nemanjić dynasty comes into the picture. This is the family that would not just rule, but build the very foundations of an empire that would last for 2 whole centuries. It all kicks off with a guy named Stefan Dušan. Now, he was this super ambitious nobleman, but from a junior branch of the family. He wasn't happy just being a puppet for the Byzantines. So in 1166, he does something pretty bold. He starts a rebellion against his own brothers, overthrows the old guard, and begins this massive project of uniting the Serbian lands of Raška with the coast. He created a unified state, finally free from Byzantine control. Okay, so Nemanjić's son, also named Stefan, takes over, and he gets it. He understands that having a strong army isn't everything. To survive, Serbia needed to be seen as legit on the world stage. You know, in medieval Europe, everything ran on recognition from the 2 big powers, Rome and Constantinople, and his whole strategy was about getting Serbia a seat at that table. So Stefan starts these really careful, complex talks with the Pope in Rome. He knew that getting a royal crown from the head of the Western Church would be a game changer. It would give Serbia undeniable legitimacy and make its Catholic neighbors, like Hungary, think twice about attacking. And it worked. In 1217, a representative from the Pope shows up and crowns him King Stefan the First crowned. Just like that, Serbia wasn't just a principality anymore. It was a real, recognized European kingdom. But you know, political independence, that was only half the battle. King Stefan's brother, a monk named Rasko, who went by the religious name Sava, he understood that real power, real sovereignty, meant you needed religious independence too. He was about to grab the other crucial piece of the puzzle. Now, Sava was this deeply respected guy all across the Orthodox world. So he travels right to the heart of the Byzantine Empire. And in 1219, he pulls off something incredible. He convinces the Patriarch of Constantinople to grant the Serbian church autocephaly, which basically means self-governance. This was huge. It meant Serbia was now fully sovereign, politically recognized by the West, and spiritually independent from the East. The Nemanjić dynasty had built a complete nation. All right, so with political and religious independence locked down, and after decades of just building up their strength, Serbia was ready for its biggest, most ambitious chapter yet, and it was all led by one of the most fearsome rulers of the Middle Ages.
This guy, Stefan Dušan, came to power at the absolute perfect time. The Byzantine Empire, which had been the big dog in the region for like 1,000 years, was just falling apart, torn to shreds by a nasty civil war. And at the same time, their other rival, the Bulgarian Empire, was weak. This created a huge power vacuum in the Balkans, and Dušan was more than ready to step in. So between 1331 and 1345, Dušan just goes on this unbelievable tear. He systematically took apart Byzantine power in the area, snatching up Macedonia, all of Albania, and big chunks of Greece. His empire just ballooned, stretching from the Danube River all the way down to the Gulf of Corinth. I mean, at its peak, Serbia controlled over half of the entire Balkan Peninsula. Just think about that.
Yeah, this was way beyond a kingdom now. In 1346, Dušan took the ultimate step. He had this Serbian archbishop raised to the level of patriarch. And then he was crowned Emperor of the Serbs and Greeks. That title, that was a direct shot at Constantinople. He was basically saying, we're the new Rome. And to run this massive, diverse empire, Dušan showed he was more than just a warrior. He was a brilliant builder. In 1349, he introduced what's called Dušan's Code, and this was one of the most advanced legal systems in all of medieval Europe. It unified laws, it regulated trade, it defined the rights of everybody from nobles to peasants, and it set up a whole court system. It was the blueprint for a stable, modern empire.
But, as we know, empires built by the sheer force of one person often face a huge problem when that person is gone. The turning point for Serbia came suddenly, and the collapse, well, it was just as fast as the rise had been incredible.
So get this, in 1355, at the absolute peak of his power, right when he was getting ready to lead a massive crusade against the rising Ottoman Turks, Stefan Dušan just dies, suddenly. He was only about 47, and the empire he had personally held together, it started to fall apart almost right away.
The problem was his son and heir, Stefan Uroš V. He was young, he was inexperienced, and he just didn't have the same authority or, frankly, the ruthlessness his father had. He couldn't control the powerful lords and generals Dušan had put in charge of these huge territories, so they started carving out their own little kingdoms, and Dušan's unified empire fractured into a bunch of squabbling states. And this all happened at the worst possible time. A new, highly organized power, the Ottoman Turks, was pushing into Europe. The showdown finally came in 1389. A guy named Prince Lazar, who ruled the biggest piece of the old empire, put together a Christian army to face the Ottomans led by Sultan Murad I at the Battle of Kosovo. The battle was an absolute bloodbath. Both leaders, Prince Lazar and Sultan Murad, were killed, but for the Serbs, it was a strategic disaster. The very core of their experienced nobility was wiped out on that field, shattering their leadership and pretty much sealing their fate. But here's the thing. The Serbian state didn't just vanish overnight after Kosovo. What came next was this desperate 70-year-long struggle that turned a military loss into a powerful cultural memory, something that would last for centuries.
So after the battle, Lazar's successor cut a deal. Serbia became an Ottoman vassal state. They could govern themselves, but they had to pay tribute and provide soldiers. And in this sort of twilight period, under a ruler named Stefan Lazarević, the state, now called the Serbian Despotate, actually had one last brilliant cultural renaissance. But the end was coming. In 1459, the huge fortress of Smederevo, their last capital, finally fell to the Ottomans. The medieval Serbian state was gone. And this is what really shows you the lasting power of history. The empire was gone, but its legacy, that lived on. The Orthodox Church, the monasteries their kings had built, the epic poems celebrating their heroes and their tragedies, especially the Battle of Kosovo, that all became the foundation of Serbian identity. This memory, this story of a great, independent medieval empire, is what kept the Serbian people going through centuries of foreign rule. And it's what eventually fueled the 19th century fight for independence that created the modern nation of Serbia we know today.